What happens when someone judges a book by its cover? Today's story might just make you think twice before making assumptions about strangers. Imagine stepping onto a luxury airliner, where the champagne flows freely and leather seats recline into beds that cost more than some cars. Now imagine being treated like you don't belong there, simply because you don't fit someone's idea of first-class material. That's exactly what happened on Flight 2473 to Dubai last month, when a young passenger in simple jeans and a hoodie became the target of one flight attendant's condescension. Eye rolls, ignored requests, whispered comments just loud enough to hear. The kind of treatment that makes your stomach knot with secondhand embarrassment. But here's where things get interesting, and why you'll want to stay until the end of this story. What this flight attendant didn't know, what none of the passengers knew, was exactly who this unassuming young man was. And trust me, the moment that revelation came crashing down like turbulence at 35,000 feet, every single person on that aircraft was left speechless. You see, sometimes the people who appear the most ordinary hold the most extraordinary secrets. And when this flight attendant discovered that the teenager she'd been dismissing was actually the son of the airline's billionaire owner, well, let's just say careers and reputations can change course faster than a plane in a storm. Stick around, because what happened next is the kind of justice that's too perfect to be fiction. But I promise you, every word of this story is true. The gleaming cabin of Emirates Platinum Airways' newest, a 380 aircraft, was a testament to luxury travel. Ambient lighting cast a warm golden glow across hand-stitched Italian leather seats, each spaced far enough apart to create private sanctuaries for the elite travelers who could afford the astronomical ticket prices. The air carried hints of sandalwood and citrus, the airline's signature scent, while crystal glasses clinked softly as pre-departure champagne made its rounds. For most passengers, this wasn't just transportation. It was an experience reserved for CEOs, celebrities, and the global elite who measured their worth in billions. The airline's reputation for exclusivity was legendary, with a waitlist for membership stretching months for those wealthy enough to even apply. Among the cabin crew, Diane Reynolds moved with practiced precision. At 42, she'd spent 20 years in the industry, working her way to the coveted position of first-class cabin manager on the airline's flagship route. Her uniform, a tailored charcoal suit with platinum accents, was immaculate, her makeup flawless, her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and perpetually evaluating eyes. Diane prided herself on being able to identify net worth at a glance, the difference between old money and new, between the genuinely wealthy and those merely pretending. She'd built her career catering to the ultra-rich, learning their preferences and peculiarities. More importantly, she'd learned which passengers deserved the full spectrum of her attention and which could be served with perfunctory politeness. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whittaker," she purred to a silver-haired finance magnate, bending slightly to offer him a warmed hand towel. "Lovely to have you with us again. I've ensured your preferred Dalmor is chilled and waiting." The businessman nodded appreciatively, completely accustomed to such personalized service. This was Diane's world, a carefully curated ecosystem where status determined treatment. The boarding process continued smoothly until a commotion at the cabin entrance broke the carefully maintained atmosphere. A young man, barely 18 by the look of him, stood hesitantly in the threshold. Unlike the other passengers in their bespoke suits and designer dresses, he wore simple dark jeans, white sneakers, and an unassuming navy hoodie. His only luggage appeared to be a well-worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Diane's lips thinned imperceptibly as she noted his attire, her mental calculation of his value to the airline, and by extension to her, registered somewhere between negligible and inconvenient. "Excuse me," the young man said softly as he double-checked his boarding pass. "I think I'm in seat 2K. One of the younger flight attendants started forward, but Diane intercepted with a subtle gesture. "I'll handle this," she whispered before turning to the boy with a professionally blank expression. "2K? That's in our first-class platinum section," she said, emphasizing the words slightly as her gaze swept once more over his casual attire. "Are you certain you have the correct boarding pass?" The young man, Alex Jensen, according to the pass he extended toward her, nodded politely. Yes, ma'am. Seat 2K. Something about his quiet confidence pricked at Diane's suspicion. Perhaps he'd been upgraded due to a system error or, more likely, was the beneficiary of some executive's spare companion ticket. Either way, he didn't belong in her carefully maintained domain of wealth and influence. "One moment, please," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes as she verified his boarding pass with deliberate slowness. Finding everything in order, she gestured toward the back of the first-class cabin with barely disguised reluctance. "Very well, that way." As Alex passed by, several passengers glanced up briefly before returning to their pre-flight routines. Only a sharp-eyed elderly woman in a cashmere travel set seemed to notice the slight curling of Diane's lips or the dismissive flick of her wrist as she directed the young man to his seat. "Can I get you anything?" Diane asked Alex, her tone suggesting she expected, perhaps even hoped, he would decline. "Just water for now, thank you," he replied with a smile that seemed genuine despite her barely concealed disdain. Diane gave a curt nod before turning away, already forgetting his request as she focused her attention on passengers she deemed more worthy. Little did she realize that the simple interaction had set in motion events that would shake the very foundation of her carefully constructed professional world. The Airbus A380 pushed back from the gate with the whisper-quiet efficiency that Emirates Platinum prided itself on. As the safety demonstration began, delivered personally rather than via video screens in first class, Alex settled into his leather seat, seemingly oblivious to Diane's continued scrutiny from the galley. "He hasn't even reclined his seat or checked the amenity options," she murmured to Sophia, a junior attendant arranging crystal glassware. "Probably his first time in first class." Sophia glanced over. "He seems nice enough. Maybe he got an upgrade." "Nobody gets upgraded to platinum," Diane scoffed. "Not unless there's a connection I'm unaware of." When the seatbelt sign dimmed, Diane resumed her practice circuit through the cabin. She delivered handcrafted cocktails to a tech entrepreneur, chatted about vintage wines with a European diplomat, and ensured a famous actress had her privacy maintained, all while conspicuously skipping over Alex's empty water glass. Finally, after serving everyone else, she approached his seat. "Excuse me," Alex said politely as she passed by for the third time. "Could I possibly get that water now? And perhaps a menu when you have a moment?" Diane turned, her smile tight. "Of course, I assumed you were sleeping." She returned with a plastic cup of water, notably different from the crystal tumblers other passengers received, and practically dropped the menu into his lap before spinning away. 2 rows behind, an older gentleman in a bespoke suit raised an eyebrow at the interaction. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin filled with the aroma of gourmet meals being prepared. Diane gracefully served each passenger, engaging in personal conversation as she arranged their selected dishes. The attention to detail was remarkable, unless you were watching Alex's experience. When she finally reached his seat, Diane's demeanor had chilled considerably. "Have you decided?" she asked curtly, pen poised over her tablet. "Yes, I'd like the herb-crusted lamb, please," Alex replied. "I'm afraid the lamb is reserved for our regular platinum members," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We have a pasta dish available for—" "Excuse me," Alex interrupted gently, "but it says here all options are available to all first-class passengers." He pointed to the clearly printed note at the bottom of the menu. Diane's nostrils flared slightly. "Let me check with the chef," she said, disappearing into the galley. The elderly woman across the aisle leaned toward Alex. "Don't let her bully you, young man. I've been flying this airline for 20 years, and there's no such policy." "Thank you," Alex smiled. "It's all right. I'm used to it." When Diane returned, she wordlessly served him the pasta dish, clearly ignoring his actual order. The pasta was noticeably smaller than portions served to other passengers, with fewer garnishes and no offer of freshly ground pepper or parmesan. As the meal service concluded, a minor turbulence sent an empty glass tumbling from Alex's tray. It didn't break but made enough noise to draw attention. Diane swooped in immediately. "This is why we ask passengers to be mindful of their belongings," she announced to the cabin at large, making a show of cleaning up. The safety of everyone is paramount. Alex's cheeks colored slightly. I'm sorry, it was the turbulence. Of course it was, Diane replied with saccharine sweetness. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another section of the aircraft. I could arrange. Is there a problem here? The authoritative voice belonged to the older businessman who had been observing the situation. His name tag, glimpsed during boarding, identified him as Richard Townsend, a member of the airline's executive board. Not at all, Mr. Townsend, Diane said, her tone instantly transforming. Just a small accident. I wasn't referring to the glass, Townsend said pointedly. Diane's smile faltered. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, sir. I think you do. Townsend's gaze hardened. I've been watching your treatment of this young man since takeoff, and frankly, it's appalling. A hushed silence fell over the nearby seats as passengers tuned in to the unfolding drama. Mr. Townsend, I assure you that all passengers receive the same level off. Don't insult my intelligence, Ms. Reynolds, he interrupted, glancing at her name badge. I've documented at least 7 instances of discriminatory service in the past hour alone. Alex shifted uncomfortably. It's really not necessary. It absolutely is necessary, Townsend insisted. Emirates Platinum has standards, and they're not being met. Diane's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing genuine alarm. A complaint from a board member could end her career. Sir, if I've given any impression off, could I speak with the cabin service director, please? Townsend requested firmly. I'll get him immediately. Sophia volunteered from nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. As Sophia departed, Diane's composure cracked further. She turned to Alex with forced contrition. Sir, if there's been any misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, came a new voice from the galley entrance, is your assumption about who deserves respect on this aircraft. All eyes turned to find a distinguished man in his 50s standing there. He wasn't in uniform, but wore an impeccably tailored suit with a small, discreet platinum pin on his lapel, a pin that only the airline's most senior executives wore. The color drained from Diane's face as she recognized him instantly. Mr. Jensen, she breathed, her eyes darting between the man and Alex. I wasn't aware you were. I didn't realize. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Alex wasn't just any passenger. And this interaction wasn't just any service failure. The young man she had been dismissing for the past hour was the son of Charles Jensen, the founder and CEO of Emirates Platinum Airway. Charles Jensen's presence transformed the cabin atmosphere instantly. The subtle murmurs among passengers fell silent as recognition spread. Many of these elite travelers had seen his face in Fortune magazine or the Wall Street Journal, but few had encountered him in person. His reputation as a self-made aviation mogul who revolutionized luxury travel preceded him. Dad, Alex said quietly, a hint of resignation in his voice. I didn't know you were on this flight. Charles moved forward with measured steps, his expression unreadable. I wasn't supposed to be. Board meeting in Dubai was moved up. His attention shifted to Diane, who stood frozen, clutching her tablet like a shield. Ms. Reynolds, isn't it? Why, yes, sir, she managed, her normally confident voice reduced to a tremor. 15 years with the company, if I recall correctly. He continued, his tone deceptively conversational. 17, sir, she corrected automatically, then wished she hadn't spoken at all when his eyebrow arched slightly. 17 years, he repeated slowly. Then you're well familiar with our core service philosophy. It wasn't a question, but Diane answered anyway, reciting the words that had been drilled into every employee from day one. Every passenger deserves platinum service, regardless of appearance, background, or connections. Indeed, Charles said, letting the word hang in the air. Perhaps you'd care to explain how that philosophy aligns with what I just witnessed. The cabin was so quiet that the gentle hum of the engines seemed thunderous. Passengers who had been pretending not to listen had given up all pretense, some even turning in their seats for a better view of the unfolding drama. Sir, I can explain, Diane began, her mind racing for an acceptable excuse. There was a misunderstanding about meal preferences and And the water served in plastic rather than crystal," interjected Richard Townsend. The deliberate ignoring of requests, the condescending tone. Were those all misunderstandings too? Charles Jensen remained unnervingly calm. "Alex, is this the first time this has happened?" Alex hesitated, glancing at Diane, whose professional life now hung in the balance. "It's not important, Dad." "That wasn't my question," Charles pressed gently. The young man sighed. "No, it's not the first time." A collective intake of breath rippled through the cabin. "Last month on the London route," Alex continued reluctantly, "and before that on the Singapore flight in November." Charles nodded thoughtfully, as if receiving confirmation of a theory he'd already suspected. "I see." Turning to Sophia, who had returned with the cabin service director, a distinguished man named Hassan who looked utterly mortified by the situation, Charles made a simple request. "Mr. Hassan, please have Ms. Reynolds take a break in the crew rest area. We'll continue this discussion after landing." As Diane was escorted away, her face ashen and her hands visibly trembling, the CEO turned back to his son. "You should have told me," he said quietly. Alex shrugged. "It wasn't worth mentioning. Besides, I wanted to see how things really work when you're not around." A flash of understanding crossed Charles's face, followed by what might have been pride. "You were testing them." "More like observing," Alex corrected. "Part of my business degree project is about service consistency across luxury brands, whether the experience matches the marketing." Several of the eavesdropping passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps wondering if they too had been unwitting subjects in the young man's research. Charles smiled slightly. "And your findings?" "Mixed," Alex replied diplomatically, aware of their audience. "Some crew members were excellent." He nodded toward Sophia, who blushed. "Others had room for improvement," Charles finished, ever the businessman, before addressing the cabin at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. Please enjoy the remainder of your flight." As Charles took the empty seat beside his son, the normal hum of first-class conversation gradually resumed, though now punctuated with furtive glances and whispered discussions about what they'd witnessed. Hassan approached cautiously. "Mr. Jensen, on behalf of the crew, I want to express our deepest." Charles raised a hand. "Not necessary, Hassan. This isn't a reflection on your leadership. But I would appreciate if you personally oversaw the service for the remainder of the flight." "Of course, sir," Hassan replied, bowing slightly before withdrawing. In the relative privacy created by their adjacency, Alex turned to his father. "You didn't need to do that. I was handling it." "Were you?" Charles asked, studying his son. "By accepting substandard service without complaint. That's not how I built this airline, Alex." "I was gathering data," Alex explained. "If I'd complained or revealed who I was, the behavior would have changed immediately, and I wouldn't have seen the truth." Charles considered this, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "You're thinking like a CEO already." "I'm thinking like a researcher," Alex corrected. "It's not about catching people doing wrong. It's about understanding why systems fail despite our best intentions." A thoughtful silence fell between them, broken only when Sophia approached with a crystal glass of water for Alex and a scotch for Charles. "Sir," she addressed Alex formally, "I want to apologize for not intervening sooner. I should have." "You have nothing to apologize for," Alex assured her. "You were kind from the beginning." Charles watched this exchange with interest. "What's your name?" he asked the flight attendant. "Sophia Chen, sir." "Well, Sophia Chen, I think my son and I would both appreciate your insights on improving our service protocols. Perhaps you could join us for a brief meeting in Dubai." Sophia's eyes widened. "I, of course, Mr. Jensen. Thank you." As she walked away, visibly stunned by this unexpected opportunity, the other passengers whispered among themselves. The story was already spreading to the other cabins, how an arrogant flight attendant had misjudged a passenger, only to discover he was the owner's son. But what they couldn't hear was the more interesting conversation occurring between father and son. "You know," Charles said quietly, This incident raises some important questions about our training procedures. Alex nodded, reaching into his backpack to retrieve a notebook filled with observations. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. The Emirates Platinum jet touched down in Dubai with the gentle precision the airline was famous for. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, the normal rustling of passengers gathering belongings was subdued in first class, where all eyes discreetly followed the interaction between the airline's founder and his son. In the galley, Diane stood with her hands clasped tightly, awaiting her fate. When Charles approached, she straightened her posture, attempting to salvage what dignity remained. "Ms. Reynolds," Charles began, his voice measured, "I'd like you to join us in the private lounge." It wasn't a request. 20 minutes later, in a sleek conference room within the exclusive Emirates Platinum Owners Lounge, Diane sat across from Charles, Alex, and Richard Townsend. Her career, her livelihood, hung by a thread. "Before you make your decision," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion, "I want to apologize. My behavior was inexcusable." Charles nodded. Yes, it was. But more concerning is what it represents. "Sir, a fundamental misunderstanding of what luxury service means," he explained. "True luxury isn't about serving the obviously wealthy or powerful. It's about treating everyone with the same excellence, regardless of appearance." Diane lowered her eyes. "I understand, sir, and I accept whatever consequences." "Alex has a suggestion," Charles interrupted, nodding to his son. All eyes turned to the young man, who leaned forward thoughtfully. "Firing you would be easy," Alex said, surprising Diane with his directness. "But it wouldn't solve the underlying problem." He slid a document across the table, page after page of meticulously documented observations from his flights. "I've identified patterns across multiple flights and routes," he continued. "The issue isn't isolated to you, Ms. Reynolds. It's systemic. The training emphasizes luxury, but sometimes forgets humanity." Charles watched his son with unmistakable pride. "Alex has proposed a revised training program, and he suggested you help develop it." Diane's head snapped up in disbelief. "Me? Who better to address these issues than someone who's perpetuated them?" Alex said, not unkindly. "You know exactly how these biases operate because you've acted on them. That perspective is valuable, if you're willing to acknowledge it and help others avoid the same mistakes." The weight of this unexpected second chance wasn't lost on Diane. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do better," Charles replied simply. "Not just personally, but institutionally. Help us ensure this doesn't happen again." Richard Townsend, who had remained silent until now, added, "It would mean a 6-month reassignment to our training division. Your experience in the air would be invaluable in reshaping how we prepare our crew." Tears welled in Diane's eyes, not from relief at keeping her job, but from genuine remorse and the humbling opportunity to redeem herself. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As Diane left the room, Charles turned to his son. "That was your mother's influence. I would have fired her on the spot." Alex smiled slightly. "No, you wouldn't have. You've always said the best business decisions aren't about punishment. They're about improvement." In the main terminal, the story of what had happened on Flight 2473 was already circulating among Emirates Platinum staff. By evening, it had reached the executive floors. By the following week, it had become a cautionary tale in training sessions throughout the company. 3 months later, Emirates Platinum unveiled its new service philosophy program, spearheaded by Alex Jensen and developed with significant input from Diane Reynolds. The airline's customer satisfaction scores rose by 27% within the first quarter of implementation. And on every Emirates Platinum flight, a small plaque now adorned the crew area, bearing the words, "True luxury is invisible until it's absent. Treat every passenger like they own the airline, because one day they might." Wow! What an incredible story of humility, respect, and unexpected consequences, right? The moment when Charles Jensen appeared in that first-class cabin and Diane realized who Alex really was. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. But beyond the satisfaction of that perfect moment of revelation, there's a powerful lesson here about how we treat people when we think no one is watching. Have you ever been judged based on appearances? Or maybe you've caught yourself making assumptions about others. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear about a time when you witnessed or experienced something similar, or how you would have handled the situation if you were in Alex's shoes. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps our channel reach more viewers who enjoy these powerful real-life lessons wrapped in dramatic storytelling. And if you're new here, what are you waiting for? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly uploads of incredible true stories that will leave you speechless, inspired, and maybe even a little wiser. For those who want more content like this, we've put together a special playlist called Sweet Justice, with similar stories of perfect karma and unexpected twists. You'll find the link in the description below. Remember, it costs nothing to be kind to everyone you meet, because you never know who might be sitting across from you. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your assumptions in check. The world is full of Alex Jensens, just waiting to surprise you.